Let's get one thing out of the way first. The Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, or CHAZ, is not autonomous. It can't survive without assistance from outside. That much is clear. It's a misnomer that muddies the water of what the CHAZ is and what it's trying to do. That's why there's been an attempt to rebrand the CHAZ into the CHOP, which stands for, depending on who you ask, either Capitol Hill Occupied Protest or Capitol Hill Organized Protest, the latter of which is a very silly name because all protests are organized in some way. I'm still gonna call it the CHAZ though, for a couple reasons. Firstly, CHOP sounds violent, and as we'll discover, there is a concerted effort by politicians and media figures to portray the CHAZ as violent and barbaric. More importantly, accuracy aside, the name CHAZ has stuck. It gets attention, and once something is named, it's really difficult to get people to call it something else, so we might as well just go with the name that people already know for clarity's sake. Also, very fun to say CHAZ. CHAZ, CHAZ, CHAZ. Get used to hearing the word CHAZ. Gonna say CHAZ a lot in this video. The CHAZ, for people that somehow don't know, is a territory within the Capitol Hill area of Seattle taken and held by protesters who have forcefully kept police out. After weeks of violent dispersal tactics by the Seattle Police Department, including the use of tear gas and blast ball grenades towards protesters fighting police brutality after the death of George Floyd, the volume of protesters eventually became too great for the police to contain. The CHAZ was established on June 8th, after police evacuated the East Precinct building, which was promptly surrounded and barricaded by protesters, making it inaccessible to the police and the epicenter of what came to be known as Free Capitol Hill. This protest is, by design, decentralized and leaderless. That means that their goals and ambitions can be difficult to suss out. On the one hand, a list of 30 demands was published on Medium.com. Abolish the police, grant amnesty to the protesters, give retrials to African Americans convicted of a violent crime with a jury of their peers, that type of thing. Others viewed the protest as, essentially, some kind of revolution. A chance to establish a legally distinct territory from the United States and create a new type of society. One thing most people seem to agree on, though, was a desire to show the world that they could survive and thrive without a police presence in the area. And largely, they've succeeded, for a time anyway, in surviving without a police presence in the area, with the notable caveat that security threats are often taken from the CHAZ to outside its boundaries for the police to deal with because, quite frankly, they don't have the infrastructure to do anything else at the moment. But in terms of showing people that this is possible, that's a bit of a mixed bag. Turns out, it's a lot harder than you might expect. Turns out, a lot of people don't want to see a project like this succeed. And a lot of them are politicians, cops, white supremacist thugs, and media figures. I don't think I can convince you of the ideological merits of CHAZ in a 20-minute YouTube video. Think of them or their tactics as you will. What I think is undeniable, however, is that there's a very deliberate misinformation campaign being concocted around the CHAZ. Take a look at this, and I cannot stress this enough, unedited segment from Tucker Carlson tonight.
Our own Kyle Rothenberg ventured into the nation, formerly known as downtown Seattle. Here's what he found. So there it is.
Look out, everyone! This guy's bored and twirling a stick around. They're giving this lady a cigarette! That's bad for your lungs! Oh no! Someone's wearing a unicorn onesie! What are we gonna do? I didn't add that music, by the way. That's the real music from the show that they used. Fox News has a lot of fun with the CHAZ, like for example, airing their shitty photoshops combining multiple images to make it look more dangerous than it is, or using photos that weren't taken within the CHAZ of urban areas on fire to pretend like people were just setting fires everywhere, I guess. There's actually a no fire rule in the CHAZ. There are exceptions for like bonfires that people set up in old fountains. But don't let a little thing like reality get in the way of your fear-mongering. Look at all of the graffiti! They're graffitiing everything!
While I'm in Capitol Hill, I just want to point out, because I keep seeing everybody talk about the horrible graffiti everywhere, that the graffiti that's happened is all on the plywood covering the windows. This is stuff that's going to be taken down when the shops reopen properly anyway. This is not any kind of permanent damage. In fact, that looks better, if you ask me, than some random fucking plywood everywhere. Like, this is beautiful, actually. This is great. They're not damaging the shop. They're not graffitiing the brick, which would be harder to clean. Just don't trust the news, okay, guys?
And Trump watches a buttload of Fox News, so you know homeboy had something to say about this. Take back your city, now! If you don't do it, I will. This is not a game. These ugly anarchists. Ugly anarchists? Hey man, come on. Must be stopped immediately. Move fast! Then the mayor responded essentially like, I don't know, dude, doesn't seem like that big a problem. Sounds like sending in the military would be much worse. Sounds like that'd be a worse problem. And then Trump deleted his tweet. He deleted the tweet where he threatened to call the military on civilians. The narrative you've likely heard about the CHAZ is that there are roving warlords, assaulting journalists, and extorting businesses. So let's just break down those claims and get them out of the way. The warlord in question is a SoundCloud rapper named Raz Simone, whose biggest warlordy action was handing out AR-15s to protesters because, and this is a direct quote, "A man just ran over protesters, hopped out, and shot one of our young black men. This is the 5th time I've witnessed this." Conservatives don't seem to have a problem with white protesters carrying AR-15s to get haircuts, so surely black protesters carrying them to avoid getting murdered shouldn't be an issue. You might recall that there was a constitutional amendment about it. Washington is also an open carry state, so there's that. Unless for some reason you don't think people should carry around AR-15s, because you seem to like them doing that most of the time. Now, Simone did push a journalist in a video. That's the assault in question. But then later, that journalist filmed a follow-up with Simone where he explains that they have no beef with one another, and the whole thing was blown out of proportion.
Hey, so I just wanted to put something to sleep right here. It's my man, Raz Simone. You know what I'm saying? There ain't no kind of issue. There ain't no kind of beef. Ain't nobody funky. We out here marching with our people. You know what I'm saying? It's all about peace and unity out here. You know what I'm saying? This is the best thing is two grown men. Man, we can not see something eye to eye. It can even get heated or whatever. But at the end of the day, we work stuff out.
Forbes actually listed a tweet by Ian Miles Cheong, a fascist goblin, as the evidence of this alleged assault. Cheong's tweet is still up, by the way, despite the fact that later evidence demonstrates it, and by extension he, is full of shit. Also, the claims that businesses are being extorted was something the police said they just heard from people, and then later had to walk back those statements the very next day, because it turns out they couldn't find a single business that this happened to. Most businesses, in fact, said that they hadn't been affected or had seen increases in foot traffic since the CHAZ began. Let me repeat that, for those of you who are not paying attention. The Seattle police had to walk back the claim that businesses were being extorted the next day because there was no evidence to support it, after they had made a public statement saying they'd heard about it happening before they got any evidence. Which is to say, they did a lying. There was lying done. It was an officer-involved lie. Am I saying that there is no violence within the CHAZ, that no one is hurting anyone else, that it's some beautiful utopia? No, obviously not. There are crimes being committed. There is violence there. Just like there is everywhere. There's always violence. You might have heard that there have been shootings. There were 3 shootings. One on Saturday, June 20th. The perpetrators fled the scene. The second one actually happened outside of the CHAZ on Sunday, June 21st. It was by a group of white supremacists that shouted a bunch of N-words and then held a man named Duan Young down and shot him, and then the police left him to die rather than escort medical personnel close to the CHAZ. Not within, just close to it, so volunteer medics had to drive him in a van to the hospital. The third was on Tuesday, June 23rd. Details are scarce. It's pretty ridiculous to me to suggest that because people within the CHAZ have been victims of violent crimes, that they are therefore violent or causing violence. In all three cases, the violence was perpetrated by people who appeared to be from outside the CHAZ, coming in with the express purpose of hurting people within it. In one case, the shooting didn't even happen within the CHAZ, but it gets tallied among the CHAZ shootings either way. But let's say, for the sake of argument, let's be totally fair and say that all of the violence could be laid at the feet of the CHAZ and the CHAZ alone. Not including the CHAZ shootings, there were 22 mass shootings in the United States resulting in 6 fatalities during the time period over which the CHAZ shootings occurred. Look at this list if you don't believe me. 3 in Chicago alone with 1 fatality and 12 injuries, making Chicago more dangerous than the CHAZ during that time period. And that's just between Saturday and Tuesday. If we expand to the entire time the CHAZ has been active, that's 53 mass shootings in the United States, resulting in 37 fatalities between June 8th and June 24th, which is the day that I wrote this. The only thing unusual about the shootings in the CHAZ is that they happened in a novel area. This isn't an issue being caused by policelessness, because last time I checked, there were plenty of police officers in the rest of the country. And there are plenty of police officers in Chicago, and in both of those places, this just happens regularly. But you don't gotta take it from me. I'm some keyboard warrior who's never even been there. Easy for me to sit back and tell you you're getting a skewed perspective on them. But how would I know? Maybe it really is a Thunderdome situation where people are cannibalizing one another for fun. Maybe the warlords have scared all the residents and business owners so badly that they've just made it look like the media has been lying about the CHAZ. The only way we'd know for sure is to have someone on the inside. Luckily for me, Neala, a colleague of mine, was exactly that. She generously agreed to an interview with me and captured the footage you're about to see as well. She got permission for it, and we've taken precautions to keep everyone safe. We've blurred everybody's face because we don't want police or white supremacists to ID people later. You gotta do that kind of thing. Don't just record people at protests. You are putting them in danger if you do that.
There's so much misinformation out there, and people talking about the direct implications of the CHOP or CHAZ. I'm going to continue to say CHAZ. I guess the goal is to show people the goodness of humanity, because the big argument against anarchy and is in general that like people are monsters, and if you take away law and order, they'll be barbaric. And I think the beauty of the CHAZ is that people were tremendously kind, quick to help each other and protect each other, and there were some bad actors, but there always will be, you know.
So what do you feel like the media is getting wrong about the CHAZ or the CHOP?
Oh gosh, depends on the media. Como 4, which people tend to assume is kind of liberal, is actually quite conservative. They're pretty good about always making houseless people or homeless people look like the worst they possibly can in any given situation. They very rarely report on houseless people sympathetically, and they're giving the CHAZ the same treatment, treating it like a scary lawless zone where anybody can do anything and there's no one to protect you, and, you know, just kind of feeding into that pro-cop narrative. Just usually this like, oh, scary lawless zone, people are running amok, there's drugs and alcohol, and there's no place to go to the bathroom and all this stuff. And
you can confirm that there are places to go to the bathroom?
Yes, there are many places to go to the bathroom. There's a lot of porta potties, and a lot of people just took it upon themselves to clean the porta potties. And I found it really funny that people were just like taping like portable like squirters of hand sanitizer, just like taping them to the side of the stalls when they ran out, because they couldn't like get the proper things to refill it. All over the place, everywhere you look, there was like hand sanitizer taped to signs and trees. And
how much time have you spent inside?
About like 5, 6 days, maybe 7, maybe a full 7 days now. Geez.
And have you been made to feel unsafe at any point?
So yes and no. On the one hand, while I've been there, I have felt tremendously safe, because every time there is a threat of danger, there's always like 10 people around to jump up and be like, hey, none of that, and like intervene. So I felt very safe by the people around me, but I didn't feel safe because the president of the country I live in was threatening to send the army in. So
I guess it's two separate questions I'm kind of asking here, because I did kind of want to get into that as well. But the narrative that I'm seeing is that it's this, lawless place where people are subject to random violence from the, I don't know if you'd call them citizens, but the occupants of the CHAZ. And then on the other side of that, there is the genuine threat of violence from the police or the National Guard or what have you.
Yeah, that's who I was most afraid. The people I was most afraid of while I was there were not the people who were occupying it. It was the Proud Boy group, the local Proud Boys, which are very active, other white supremacist groups, and the police and the army. I was very rarely scared for my safety. There was like little moments where they'd be like, that person's doing a dangerous thing. And like you'd find out about the threat and then look over and see like 20 people swarming to take care of it. And you're like, oh, okay. Get the first aid kit and wait and see if anybody needs treatment. Did that by default because that's most of what I did during these protests. But there was a set up medic tent and the medics there were like actual doctors. So my services were not needed in that way. But one kind of sad but wholesome thing that I kept seeing is people coming into the CHAZ to go to the medic tent and get medical treatment who like weren't staying there, who were just people who lived nearby and had like little medical problems that they needed looked at and couldn't afford to get seen. A lot of people were like, the local people, everyone I talked to anyway, seemed to be really happy about it. Like even people like the old white conservative dudes couldn't say anything bad.
What is your sense of the hostilities between, I guess, more so the people who are maintaining this project and the people within the territory that aren't necessarily maintaining the project?
Most of the people I talked to who live in the area, who just like live in the apartments around the CHAZ, were really grateful when it opened up because it meant that there was no more police and no more tear gas. Like, that's the big complaint. I can breathe again because there's no more tear gas in the air. That's the number one thing I heard. A lot of people who live nearby liked that they could just like bring their kids and let them run around and not have to worry too much about like tear gas or police brutality. Especially like the local people of color felt a lot safer letting their kids play in that area than they had before. The general sense of a community, like even though you didn't know a lot of the people there, and even though who was technically leadership was a little bit deliberately nebulous and vague, there was still a sense of just like talk to the person involved and people around you will figure out what to do if there's a situation. And like there's one homeless dude who showed up. He was having a bad night. We don't know why or what was going on. We don't know if it was intoxication or if he was having some sort of episode. But every time a woman would walk by, he'd be like, "Do you want to see my willy?" And they'd be like, "Nope," and keep walking. And as soon as enough people found out what was happening, they just like kind of corralled him and were like, "All right, here, we're going to get you checked out by the medics." And then they just encouraged him to get into his tent and go to bed. And then in the morning, I saw him walking around picking up garbage. Like if the police had been called, that man would have ended up in jail or
worse.
Or much, much, much worse. Like best case scenario, he went to jail for the night and lost his tent and all of his belongings because they wouldn't let him bring it with him and it wouldn't be there in the morning. Something they did that police never do is they asked all the women who had been flashed like what they wanted to happen. And the consensus was like, we just want him to stop and go to bed.
You mentioned that the leadership is intentionally nebulous. And I was wondering if you could speak to the kind of structure of how things are run.
Everyone who was there largely grew up in America. And as a result, we all have a very hierarchical sense of thinking. And that's how we tend to want to organize things because it's the only system that we really know. So when suddenly everything is lateral, there's bound to be a little confusion. The sense that I got was that the leadership was deliberately nebulous because nobody wanted to be like the figurehead because that made them a target. Nobody wanted to be like on the top because then that's not a lateral hierarchy. So it became a question of like separate people were like the information people you would go to if there was like if depending on what was going on. So if you needed supplies, you could go to like shop and see like she was the one giving shop, everything was free. She was the one giving out most of the supplies, so you could go to her and be like, "Hey, what do you need?" And she would have the most up-to-date information on that. Or if there was a security problem, you could go to some of the folk at the barricades and be like, "Hey, there's kids climbing up onto the roof of a nearby building. What do you want to do?" And then they would kind of help with that. So there was like different groups of people who you would go to for different things, and figuring that out at first was a bit tricky But you could generally ask anyone at a stall and they'd be like, oh, this is who you talk to about this, and point you in the right direction.
Rather than like a top-down leadership, it's kind of organized into different affinity groups.
A little bit, yeah. And it happened kind of organically, and it takes some adjusting. You know, when you grow up in a hierarchical system and suddenly things are lateral, it's hard to adjust because you don't think in that way. You think like, okay, well, who's in charge of you? Oh, no one, because that's not how it works here.
So you're not being run by local warlords?
Oh, definitely not, no.
Okay. How long do you think this project can last?
Well, given that today the mayor announced that they were going to be sending police in again and wanted people out.
Today?
I honestly don't know. Yeah, like this morning, because of the shootings. Which, for the record, I can pin almost completely on the police for that because of some stupid shit they did. But I am a pessimist. Like, as soon as I got there, I was like, we could be raided at any minute. And I was just tense and unwilling to invest in, like, structural... Like, I would do it because everybody else was, and I felt like it was the correct thing to do. But I'm just a kind of a pessimistic person. So I was like, oh, we could totally plant this sick garden, but what's the point when the police are going to kick us out?
In the event that it doesn't last, in the future, when this type of thing is attempted again, because I imagine, like, given the wild success, like, in my opinion, like, nobody could have predicted that something like this would happen. What do you think could be done differently?
Well, I think it was handled really well, as best it possibly could be. But the fact is, it's a bunch of people with canned goods and seeds and a lot of determination armed against the entire police force of the city. And the only thing we had on our side for a little while was optics, but then that even started to change because of how the news reported on it. And for a while, when it was like, oh, these peaceful people are occupying this area of Capitol Hill to deliberately make a safe area for people of color, then that's like, that looks really good. And if the police come in guns out, suddenly it looks really bad. They must have known that because they insisted on taking out like a little hunk of the CHAZ, and the path they took out, it was like a little C where they went up on like 11th and turned on Pine, and it goes right by Cal Anderson Park. And as soon as they took that street and moved the barricades that the people could drive through for traffic, quote unquote, reasons, everybody was instantly very tense. They were like, we can't see who's going to drive up now. And there have been a lot of threats from like Proud Boy and white supremacist groups. This is the perfect path for Nazis to do a drive-by if they wanted to. And then that happened. And now the police have an excuse to close down the top.
Have you been since the shootings?
Yeah, I went up to see if they needed supplies and brought some stuff, but I didn't spend the night.
Yeah. How's the vibe changed?
There's not as many normies, and the festival vibe has kind of been diminished, but the festival vibe was never something that could be maintained for very long anyway.
No.
It was just what happened when a lot of casual and like normal people showed up to see what was going on out of curiosity. And in all seriousness, I don't know what could be done differently. I'm not any kind of expert on this. I hope it lasts. I really do. And I hope that, like, there were some internal problems. Like, a lot of the people of color were complaining that they were being spoken over by having, like, white guys talk over them all the time, and they were getting annoyed with that. And that's valid and legit. So as soon as they brought that up, a lot of people took precautions to make sure that that stopped happening. There was, like, at one meeting I was lucky enough to get to sit in at, there was a kind of a no interrupting policy, and if you interrupted, you had to leave. By the end of the like 20-minute meeting, there were no white guys left. And like, to be fair, most of them were like, shit, sorry, bye, and they would just like apologize and leave and be like, fuck, I did it, I'm so sorry, and they would like excuse themselves.
Sure, that's who I would be, is the person that did it by accident. Absolutely. A
lot of the people who are organizing and helping like run things at the CHAZ are people who also work at like houseless shelters. Yeah, so they have a lot of people there have conflict mitigation strategies that are really like nuanced and just like a situation to situation basis. The vast majority of people who were at the CHAZ and CHOP were kind. They were there to help. They took a lot of responsibility to help people and gather supplies and spread information, and they were the quiet ones. They weren't the ones who were behind a mic or who were screaming the most, but they were the ones who were there doing the work. Inherently, people are good. If there's not a hierarchical structure, there will be some confusion while people figure things out, but people aren't inherently monsters. They're not inherently going to go straight towards barbarism as soon as there's not a jackass with a badge around to enforce some structure. I mentioned earlier that there was I'd find out that there was some danger and then it would immediately be resolved. So one evening when I was sitting by my tent with some friends, I heard a woman yell "Heads up, that guy has a knife!" And I turned and there was a guy running with a knife and 7 people chasing him. And he wasn't able to stop because if he had, they would have caught up. And I was sitting next to my friend, who on Twitter I call Kevin because I don't want to say his real name.
Sure.
Who wasn't listening, and he just looked up and he was like, "Oh, are we playing tag?" And then he jumps up and takes off. But so yeah, I'd hear about a danger like that guy, and suddenly it's taken care of. Or somebody be like, "Watch out, Nazi with a firework," and then there'd be a boom, and by the time I looked over, there was 5 people swarming them, and people had traffic cones to block it, so that when it went off, it didn't hurt anyone. And it's oh, okay, cool. So I don't know if you guys, or if how much information is getting out there, but the issue with the shootings, basically what went down is that prior to the shooting, there was an unrelated medical emergency, and the medics within the CHAZ had a meet point set up for paramedics to easily get in and get people and get out. And after that medical emergency, they gave the little cut of the CHAZ to the cops and to the public so that they could drive through. And people were upset about that because they're oh, it makes it really easy to do a drive-by, and we've gotten lots of threats from local Nazi groups. We have every reason to think somebody's going to try that. And something similar happened. But once the first shooting had happened, the medics got there and were treating them right away, and the danger was pretty much immediately resolved. My understanding is that security got the shooter. Either they got them or chased them off. I'm still unclear about which, but the medics got to the injured person, and they were waiting for paramedics to come in. But despite the fact that they had made it clear that there was no present danger, the police would not give the go-ahead for the paramedics to come in. They just point blank refused. So the medics just took the injured person in a personal car to the local hospital. And after that, a little while later, the police swept the CHAZ with guns out. And that was incredibly tense and unpleasant, I'm told. I wasn't actually there for that. I think I probably would have been very frustrated had I been there. And I would have let my displeasure be known verbally, which cops love.
Yeah.
They love it when you say mean things to them. So my personal theory is that the slice of the CHAZ that was given up from 11th into Pine was done deliberately so that it would be easier for the white supremacist groups that were making threats to get in and do violence. That way, when violence was done, they would have an excuse to shut it down. There are a lot of local cops who are also part of the Proud Boys and white supremacist groups, so it was probably just partially because they wanted an excuse to come in and shut it down, and partially because they wanted to be able to hurt people. It was really suspicious when they opened up that section of street. Everybody was like, why though? The Proud Boys are threatening us. Other groups are threatening. Why are you going to make it easier for them? Because it was an area where people in the Cal Anderson Park couldn't see who was about to drive up. And so there was no prep time to be oh, that's clearly a Nazi. They've got the stupid Trump flag and the Confederate flag. They're oh, that person's probably not safe. Let's all get down or something. There was no time to prepare, no time to do anything. And even during that situation, the running theme, the thing I noticed more than anything was kindness, people helping each other and putting up memorials and mourning and feeding each other and sitting and talking and educating each other and open smoking. But in terms of everything else going on, security did not care about people who were just having a cigarette, some people were upset about the drinking. They're oh, nobody should have any alcohol open because it doesn't look good for optics. And it's well, they're not talking about the alcohol right now. They're talking about the supposed warlord. So I don't think someone having a beer is really the biggest problem right now, but that's certainly an opinion.
Look, you don't have to agree with what the people in the CHAZ are doing. You're free to have your own opinion. But I think it's irresponsible to not recognize that there is a considerable sensationalistic portrayal of the area as basically fallout happening in Seattle. I'm sure you can find news stories that make all sorts of ridiculous claims about what's happening within, but I'd ask that you actually read those stories and evaluate their trustworthiness. Chances are they're using some qualifier like people are saying or we've heard reports so that they can report dishonest statements that might get clicks without fact checking. And then ask yourself this: if the area truly is some hellscape, some Mad Max wasteland where the strong rule over the weak, if it's truly so dangerous that everyone within fears for their lives, why do these news outlets feel the need to be dishonest? Surely, if that's the case, it would be trivial to present real evidence. Instead, they just put scary music over people in unicorn onesies and run with unsubstantiated reports without evidence. If you think you've seen that evidence, go back and look a bit more closely and see if maybe you just saw hearsay and fear-mongering masquerading as journalism. Hello and welcome to the Eyeball Zone. Here in the Eyeball Zone, a distant voice is calling, listen. You can't hear it. You can see it. Eyeballs do not hear, they see. But between colors, between form, there lies a warning. Dare you read it? This episode would not have been possible without the hard work of Neala, who came to me with her footage, graciously agreed to be interviewed, and helped me get my facts straight about the script. You can follow her on TikTok, where she posts videos of her drawing, and then the finished pieces on Twitter. And also, she draws on Twitch too, which you can also watch. Right now, she's working on a project where she draws thick girls until she learns to stop hating her own body, in her own words. And that sounds like the type of thing my audience can get down with. I demand that you check her out. She did me a real solid. Do you have a small leftist project you'd like to forever taint with the mark of the eyeball? Send me no more than one email at thoughtslimeeditor@gmail.com, and perhaps you will find yourself trapped here in the Eyeball Zone. Hey, thanks for watching this video. Take a look in the description for Dewan Young's Cash App, because that's where the ad revenue for this one is going. He's got medical bills, and the way things are going, he's probably going to have some legal bills for some bullshit reason at some point, so let's show him some love and support and remind him that we haven't forgotten about him. If you like the video, you know, if it would be nice if you press the like button. I would appreciate that. I like it when people do that. You can also subscribe to me and hit the bell and all that garbage. That helps me get more people to watch my videos, so that's why I ask you to do it. You can also see more of my videos over at youtube.com/scaredycatstv, where I talk about horror movies. I also stream on both YouTube and Twitch every Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can catch me there. Hit the jangle that bell and you'll get notified when I go live. That's a little benefit for the bell that maybe you didn't know about. Boy, it's hot here. Boy, it's hot, don't you think? It's a little too hot for me, Thoughtslime. Sweating a lot. Looking forward to my new apartment with central air. That's gonna rule.